For our keynote address today, we have a fireside chat with Venky Harinarayan, moderated by Shree, Srikanth. Venky is an entrepreneur and investor. He founded two startups, Jungly, which was acquired by Amazon.com, and Cosmix, which was acquired by Walmart. He helped create Amazon's marketplace business, the concept behind Amazon's mechanical turk, and founded Walmart Labs. Anybody from Walmart Labs here? He was one of the earliest angel investors in Facebook back in 2005. Other angel and venture investments include Lyft, Upwork, and AppNexus. He was named to the 100 most creative people in business in 2012 by Fast Company. He is a distinguished alumnus from IIT Madras. A fun fact is that he is also the co-owner of the San Francisco Unicorns, a cricket team that will play in inaugural MLC season in July. Whoa. And another interesting fact is, he is from Goda.
Whoa! He had 1 year in Tampi, right?
Moderating this fireside chat is Shree Srikanth. She's an accomplished technology professional with extensive experience in computing, infrastructure, data analytics, and e-commerce. She has proven track record in leading tech organizations and has delivered high-impact solutions for business growth at Google and Robinhood. She is a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion in the tech industry. Leaning into her passion of building products for women, Shree recently started a company that provides human-led assistance to busy and working mothers. No robotics here. When her right brain kicks in, Shree loves making elaborate cakes for her family that have included a narwhal and a dump truck. And for this interesting keynote talk, over to Shree.
Thank you. You can probably guess the ages and genders of my children based on. Can you hear me better now? Yeah. Awesome. It's a pleasure to be talking to Venky today, and so because I know we're already kind of behind schedule, I'm going to go into questions right away. We had a very interesting panel earlier on entrepreneurship and what we built for the next decade. And as someone who's been a very successful serial entrepreneur, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is how do you navigate the uncertainty and the rapidly changing landscape that we build in?
Well, I think if you want a landscape that is not changing, that comes with its own problems, right? Then you should go to Detroit where nothing changes over many years. So the fact that you have so much opportunity here is exactly because the landscape changes so often. And so you just have to embrace change. I think it is, as an entrepreneur, change is what gets you in the game in the first place. If things will change, there is no need to be an entrepreneur. So yes, it is required. That said, there is normal change and there is, I would say, a very discontinuous change. And typically, what I've seen is that financial markets move at a different cycle than startups do. So if you look at Wall Street can go from extreme positivity to extreme negativity literally overnight. And when you hit one of those inflection points, that, in my mind, is really hard for a startup, right? Those changes tend to be very hard because you simply cannot move in that fashion, and all the rules that you followed so far are no longer true, and suddenly everything has to change, and people expect you, your board will expect you to change overnight. Everybody wants you to be the new reality. And to be honest, a lot of times that's the wrong advice. Okay? And so here's what I tell folks. When you go through a change like that, like what, to be very precise, what we saw in 2022 from 2021, if you're a startup, I'm talking to the startup folks here, right? If you're a startup, it is not sufficient to survive. Because when you come out of this downturn, no one wants you if you just survive. So it is just a slow death. So the challenge for a founder, challenge for a leadership team of a startup is you have to find a way to win. You have to find a way to thrive in this period. And that is not always what your board wants you to do, and that is usually the wrong choice. And I know this because I was a startup founder in 2008, 2009, when the public markets decided to go nuclear for a 6-month period. And my board wanted me to fire 3/4 of the employees at Cosmos, right? And I told them no, because if I do that, I'm not coming out of this in one piece. I'm just going to be slow death, and my time is more valuable to me than your money is. And so it is. It's important to play offense at all points in time. So typically what happens is the startup needs to retool for 3 to 4 months to get the right cost structure. You might need to cut things, but then you have to figure out how to play offense.
So that's awesome. And I mean, now as a VC, this is a different perspective, right? What do you tell the companies that you funded in terms of fighting this market? Is it some of the same stuff, or I mean, are you?
No, this is exactly what I tell the companies, right? As in, you have to win. And it's not sufficient to just. So survival is okay for the 3 to 6 month period, but then if you're not playing offense, you're just wasting. What I tell you startup founders is your time is maybe the most valuable asset, more than even my money, right? You want to be in a startup situation that is going to be not going anywhere for a long period of time. You might as well quit, start something else, or find something else, right? So you have to also, as a startup founder, value your time very highly. So that's important.
Cool. So, I mean, again, like one of the key topics from this morning was, looking at frontier technology, looking at what's coming up. And I mean, throughout your career, I feel like you've shown the ability to identify promising ideas in companies ahead of their time. This was like your early involvement with e-commerce, with Junglee, Amazon, your investments in Meta, and other portfolio companies. AI is undoubtedly big, and we have a lot to talk about it, but I'm curious to also get your perspective on like specific technologies or emerging trends that you think are going to be transformative over the next few years?
So listen, I think the way the valley works is, you have to identify one or two things, right? Because no one lists all the stuff that you went wrong on, right? And so every one of us has our share of things that we thought we were going to make it, but never happened, right? So I would say it's hard to call. Obviously, AI seems very exciting at this point. You can look at, what I'd say is you can look at some broad trends. What I will tell you is what we're seeing with what we do at Rocketship is very data-driven. Is we look at India, for example, we think India is an engine of growth for a long period of time, right? So you can invest around that for a long period of time. You look at AI is obviously very disruptive at this point. But I think, to be very honest, outside of OpenAI, I'm sure Srikanth will talk a lot more about it, it's hard to still figure out what role startups have in this ecosystem. I think obviously OpenAI, Microsoft, awesome, you have Facebook, Google, all these guys. They obviously have great opportunity in front of them. But as an investor, we are still sort of scratching our heads a little bit, trying to understand what the startup opportunities are. It's just to be very, very clear. That doesn't mean there is not any, it's so early, I think things are, but one thing which I would just say is, if this thing is truly as disruptive as people think it is, the application sets that we're starting to see in the startup world are still too incremental for us. You need to see some crazy ass ideas which we are not seeing yet. So
maybe Srikanth can actually talk about some of the things that are happening, on your platform next time. That'd be definitely good to hear. Another topic that has been very interesting to this crowd, which we can get started on, is your investment in San Francisco unicorns. Sure. So, you've done this investment early in many different fields. What led you to get involved in the effort of bringing cricket to the United States, and why now?
So cricket is, first of all, cricket in the United States has a very checkered history. The United States played the first test like 150 years ago or something. But more recently, it has been plagued with a lot of corruption and the cricketing bodies here. So around 5-6 years ago, the ICC came in, the National Cricket Council came in, and rebooted the entire state of cricket in the US. And as part of that, they wanted, to drive more adoption of cricket with a cleaner platform. Coincident with that, we had the emergence of T20 as a format, which has been very dramatic. T20 IPL started in India, I would say, 2008, 2009. In the scope of less than 15 years, it is the #2 most valued league in the world. And on a per game basis, I think it's #2 only to the NFL. So that is remarkable growth. So obviously there is something here that has caught people's attention, imagination, and the format just is sort of a killer app in some sense, right? And one way to think about T20 is that T20 is sort of the Americanization of cricket in a very basic way. So it feels like a natural fit that this is if we're going to try one more shot in the US with T20, this time with a clean platform, it felt like the right fit. And also we have a great diaspora here. That's the initial focus, is really to attract the folks who are from the cricket playing nations who are out here, to engage them in cricket first. And so it felt right. One of the ways to think, a couple of facts which I found were very interesting. If you look at the Bay, you look at actual field usage in the Bay Area, cricket is actually more popular than baseball, right? which is pretty remarkable. You look at just the population. The number of Indians in the US is greater than the population of New Zealand. The average income of these Indians is also greater than the per capita income of New Zealand. So at the very least, if we can engage these guys, you've got an opportunity which is as attractive as New Zealand, which is a good place to start. And then if we can get more mainstream, that is awesome, right? But for now, I think that was sort of, at a very high level, that was it. And to be honest, this is not a commercial, it can never be a commercial sort of goal. I think the goal here is to have some fun, not lose too much money, and hopefully come out on the other side, right?
The key question is, what do your 3 boys think about it?
None of them follow cricket. They're all into racing. Two of them are into racing cars. So yeah, cricket.
You want to start converting them first to see how.
Yeah, I think to be honest, the second generation is going to be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But let's get the first generation first, right? The guys who come right now, let's try to get them engaged.
Cool. So.
But the quality of players, just to finish up, the quality of players is awesome. One thing we've noticed is almost everybody wants to play in the US. And so you're going to see the absolute cream of the crop, all the way from, Srikanth and Finch, just the absolute best players. In fact, I'd argue that because we have more international players than the IPL, the actual quality of the top players per team is even going to be better than the IPL. But and we've got a lot of the IPL guys also involved, so it's great from that point of view. Our inaugural season is mid-July, and we don't have the stadiums yet in the Bay Area, so it'll be in Dallas and North Carolina.
But eventually, I think.
Yeah, next year I hope we have something.
Awesome. I mean, before I proceed with more questions, because I know we've gone over on every panel, I also want to just get the audience primed for questions in a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, getting to the mics. Other thing that I wanted to ask about, because you've worked with many industry leaders like Sergey, Jeff. What are some things that you see in them in terms of either anecdotes that you've had about them, or just things that you've seen in them that you think make for good leadership?
So you start with and just to give you some context, I think that's maybe the most, that is what my kids find most interesting about all the stuff I've done, right? So I did my PhD at Stanford, and so in 95, 96, the web was just happening, right? So I go to my office mate, and I say, what is this thing called the web? So he said, okay, nobody's doing it. I'll come to your desk and install it. So he came in and installed X-Mosaic. And then he sort of said, do you want the web server as well? I'm like, no, I'm not, but I just want to browse, right? So this was Sergey Brin. He was my office mate for 3 years at Stanford. And so Google was just about happening then, and so we had a bird's eye view into, it was called Backrub at that point. And so we were all Sergey and I, none were part of the same database group, so we were pretty close at that point. Then went to Amazon, where I ended up working for Jeff. And even with Jeff, it was, like I mentioned to you yesterday, the 3 months in, our CEO at Jungly decides to leave Amazon, right? So Jeff shows up in my office and says, I don't want you to leave. You should leave. I told Jeff, I'm happy to stay on.
Because we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry.
You don't hear anything otherwise.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's right. So I told him basically that I need time with him. So I ended up spending an hour every week with Jeff, working really, really closely and literally with no topic in mind, but got to know exactly what he was thinking at that formative stage of Amazon. And we stayed very close, I would say, till 2006, and then went our separate ways, right? And Mark was also interesting, Zuckerberg was also interesting, because I ended up becoming an angel investor at Facebook. Because I was, that's again a funny and long story. But net, I would say there was actually a very interesting article today in the Wall Street Journal which captured exactly what I had written a few years back, because I ended up working with these guys fairly closely. And it was talking about Elon Musk and how Elon Musk approaches business. And I think the key words are first principles, right? So the way to think about how each of these guys approaches problems is they don't care to know what the rest of the world thinks. They want to build it for themselves from the ground up, from the first basic axioms and on first principles, right? And wherever they end up, they end up. And if it sort of meets up with what everybody thinks they should do, great. If it does not, it doesn't matter. That's what they're going to do, right? And so this is how they work. And to do this well, you've got to be able to think very clearly, think very quickly, and be very bold about where you end up. You've got to have the courage of saying, if I end up at point X, I'm going to do point X, even if the rest of the world thinks it's stupid, right? The flip side is, how do you work with these guys, right? These guys do not like to be told what they should do. So that is not, if you keep telling them do this, they're like, yeah, I'm not interested in what you have to say. But on the other hand, if you give them new ideas, new ways to think about things, that's who they want around them, right? And so that's how they respond to, that's the guys they want around them. And guys who can do things that they want them to do. So that's important.
It's awesome. We actually have a lot of people from the 2018, 2020, 2021 batches. This is very useful advice to all of them as well in terms of what to do when they get started. Oh, sorry. Okay, cool. Let's take some audience questions now, because we have about 15 minutes.
I was just going to say, if we can get a IITM group together to go to MLC 27th to 30th, I'd be willing to host a mixer so we can meet some of the players.
So, great point. I can make it a little...
We can kick off the SFU Records fan club right here.
I can make it a little easier for you. What we're trying to do this year is to have the players actually show up just before the tournament in the Bay Area for 2-3 days. So there will be an event, I believe, on Friday in Fremont. So I'll make sure that we can maybe even do it in Fremont if that makes sense. Maybe have the idea to have it. I can just coordinate with me. I can help set that. Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Can you talk about some of your key player signings?
Yeah, so I can't talk publicly. I can tell you who we've announced publicly, but the rest will come out this week, coming week. We've got Aaron Finch as the captain, Shane Watson is the coach, Marcus Stoinis, Matthew Wade. That's sort of the Australian thing. We've got Lungi Ngidi, who's from South Africa. We've got a couple of players who we're very excited about but can't announce yet because we're waiting for NOCs from their board, and a few others. But yeah, pretty excited about the quality so far. And the two players that we're excited about are actually world-class players, and so we'll just waiting for their board.
How many Indian players? I didn't get it.
Yeah, so the BCCI does not permit Indian players to play outside India because they want the IPL to be the most valuable thing, so they don't want to tie it into Japan.
Ambani is because he retired.
Yes, so you've got to wait for these guys to retire, so our hope is at some point Dhoni will play for Texas. Because Texas is the Texas Super Kings, right? So,
Any other questions? Or let's keep talking. So I think one of the things that we've been talking about is, actually this was another very interesting conversation previously about this cross-border, funding as well as just the startups in India. Since Rocketship is also another, you guys are also actually investing in India pretty heavily. I was curious to kind of hear your perspective on how the Indian startup scene is different from here and what you see as things we can leverage from there.
Yeah, so Rocketship is a very different venture fund. It's my second go around in doing a venture fund, so wanted to do something very different. It's a very data-driven venture fund, so what we do, and it's important to understand how we approach investing. So it's a very data-driven venture fund, so we have the largest database of startup activity in the world. We actually write AI, ML, whatever you want to call algorithms of top to identify companies that we're excited about. And then we go out and we talk to those companies. We're very outbound, we don't wait for the companies to come to us. So the first 2 years, we started in 2014. The first 2 years, we did not invest much in India at all. 2016 end, I would say half the companies we started talking to were based in India. And we did not know what had happened here. It was just what the data was throwing up. So we pick up the phone, we call our contacts in India, the venture capitalists there. None of them says anything different. They say nothing's changed, right? But we see India with respect to every other country in the world, and we see something has changed very dramatically. So we started investing, I would say, very actively in India from the end of 2016. And it took us 6 months to figure out what had happened. And what had happened was, end of 2016, there was a service called Reliance Jio, which launched in India. Reliance Jio took the cost of bandwidth of India from the most expensive in the world to the cheapest in the world overnight. And what happened was, on a monthly basis, there were 30 to 40 million new cell phone subscribers who were coming online. And this sort of growth was not there anywhere else in the world, right? And so what we got very lucky with was we made a bunch of bets at that point, which have obviously done well. And we continue to invest because we continue to see that. Obviously, things have slowed down a lot in the last, I would say, 6 to 9 months. But when things go good, they go amazingly well. It's because you've got massive scale. You have to find a way to monetize that scale, which is always the big challenge in India. But that is it. So what is the difference? Indian companies, the startups which work really well, are by and large consumer companies. It's hard in India to do a B2B selling into businesses in India. Okay? And the SaaS companies are happening in India, but they tend to be much more focused on customers in the US. So you can look at global customer bases for Indian SaaS companies. But the consumer companies in India are when lightning strikes, the scale is massive. And again, like I said, the issue is always monetization. If you look at the US, on the other hand, consumer companies really have not happened here in the last, I would say, since the whole shared economy stuff, we haven't seen a wave of consumer companies. So it's very different. So consumer is almost all centered in India at this point, with maybe developing world as sort of the adjoining parts. B2B is almost all in the developed world, and I'd say disruptive stuff like AI is all in Silicon Valley. That's maybe the way to think about it as well.
Yeah, my name is Gopal. So since you are invested in Meta, so probably this is not the right way to ask the question. So basically, anything like LLM happens, then so Meta comes with associated the Islam model, and then this lately the music generation, the NLTS, the whole translation system. So everything they are just doing the research in the AI side and then making it open source, and simultaneously heavily investing on something that is yet to come or may not come, something called metaverse. So how do you see this, as a VC, that is it a right venture? What's going on in the right side?
Listen, I think Srinivasan may be better off answering this question. You should ask him. But what I will tell you just on the metaverse, on the AI side, I think what they do is very smart. That's maybe the right way for them to play if they can make it open source, the whole thing, the llama. But the metaverse for me is very questionable. I as a VC, when you invest, you want to invest in things where you see grassroots adoption. Okay? A good way to think about how we look at the world is we don't want to do top-down stuff. We want to invest in things that the grassroots are adopting, right? And metaverse at this point does not really have grassroots adoption.
Just one more question. About the B2B thing in India, like this Kodan and Pagar book, they go well. And then. So how do you see this? Because they were into every kind of B2B kind of selling. How do you see a particular vertical SaaS kind of B2B doing in a particular, in a domain or industry?
So we're an investor in Tata Book in India, so we know the space well. I wouldn't really call it B2B because it really is about small merchants. So it's almost a consumer play because they have tens of millions of merchants. So it ends up being more of a consumer play. The B2B is more like selling it to a large company. That I think is a hard, because in India, to be very honest, the large companies don't give you much margins. And so it's a brutal sales cycle is what I'm told.
And how do you see this in the same panning out in the beauty segment?
Pardon?
In beauty and salons, like there is a company where I invested, so they are doing kind of B2B selling in a vertical SaaS manner.
I think the thing in India is, I think if you're going to the consumers and the small scale businesses, I think there's enough volume that you can try to make. If you go to some of the larger businesses, you have to find US customers as well, is what I've seen.
Hi, my name is Padma. Venky, your profile was really interesting. You seem to have been successful in everything that you ventured into, including doing something like Walmart Labs. Who would have thought that a prestigious engineering firm could be added to Walmart? At least I didn't think it that way. So I was curious on, was there or is there continuing to be a central thought or set of parameters which you apply in terms of the businesses that you invest in or the startups that you're part of that you can share with us?
Sure, I'll tell you a funny story on Walmart since you brought that up. So the first week after we got acquired, it wasn't clear to us that the engineers would even stay, right? No engineer wants to, like your point, he wants to work at Walmart. So we didn't know if we could keep our team together to the close, which was 2 weeks away. So anyway, we made an offer to a designer in San Francisco, right? Guy signed up, everything was good. And he was supposed to accept his offer the next day. Next day he calls me and says, sorry, I can't join, right? I'm like, what happened? Everything was good, you like the salary, everything was good. Basically, the offer letter had gone to him in a Walmart letterhead. He did not see working at Walmart, right? So it became clear to us that we had to create a completely different brand. And it's been hugely successful because what I'm told today, we started with 40 people. Today it's around 12 to 15,000 people. It's absorbed, even the Pentonville things all been rolled in. It's not called Walmart Tech, but it's the same sort of model. But, to your point, I think it's all about just first principles, right? Just figuring out what needs to get done and do it. Like I had a board member at Jungley, and I was, because we had 4 founders, all of whom were PhDs from Stanford, or in the PhD program, and Rakesh was our CEO, the business guy. I got started into marketing, right? Because there were more than enough engineers. I was a PhD guy, I had no idea about marketing and business at that point. So I go to my board member, this guy was a guy who started software publishing, right? And I say, listen, why am I shouldn't be doing this? It's hard, I don't know what I'm doing. And he just said, listen, you're an engineer, okay? Everything is fundamentally, at the end of the day, an engineering problem. Just make all the business problems into engineering problems and solve it the best you can. Okay? That's it. I think that's the secret at the end of the day. I think we, as trained engineers, we have the most structured way of looking at things. Every startup, every large company, anything you do is all about dealing with a lack of structure. So the ability to impose any structure on that is a core advantage. To the degree that we can do it, I think you can do better than anybody else. I think you're doing great.
Sure, that resonates with this crowd.
Has to, right?
I'm Jnani Palanikumar. I'm a business coach for startups. So I have a 2-part question.
Sure.
Can you tell us about your working style with the founders, startup founders?
Sure.
Second thing is I coach international companies, right? But companies who are coming out of India, there is a communication problem of they are not used to the coaching and mentoring and paying forward. I found it very difficult to coach companies who is coming out of India. So can you share your experience on that?
So my style is 2 things. When I talk to a founder, what I like to do is I like to put myself in their shoes. and be very, very honest about what I would do if I were in their shoes, right? And the second thing I always tell people is, don't take my advice. I'm just giving you some ideas. If it makes sense, think about it. But no one in the world should be giving a founder any advice, right? Because the founder is thinking about their world 24/7. At best, I'm thinking about it for 5 to 10 minutes a week. And so for me to have the presumption to tell anybody, I know that's how I would react as a founder when somebody told me stuff, right? So what I try to do is try to be as unbiased as possible. Okay? So no matter what my financial involvement or stake is, I try to take it out entirely and just be totally unbiased. In a lot of cases, it actually is working against my financial interest in the near term, but obviously it's always aligned in the long term, right? And I think that's sort of what I'm doing. I just try to act like if I were in that role, what I would do, because I have been in that role before, and ends up actually working really well in building a relationship with founders. And that's in terms of meeting founders who are not part of the portfolio, who are pitching me ideas and stuff. Again, I think of founders as experts in that thing, right? And I think of myself as getting a 45-minute or 1-hour tutorial on some topic area, okay? It's for free, right? So that's all I try to do. I just try to understand what they're doing and just try to learn whatever it is they're doing, and that tends to go a long way in both understanding what they're doing as well as them feeling a degree of comfort. But in terms of India versus US, I actually have a slightly different point of view. My experience with Indian founders has been sort of mind-blowingly good. I feel like you can take any of those guys we invested in, within reason move them here, and I don't see that there is a huge drop-off, especially the current crop of founders, right? I do think there were issues more on the investing side, but I think there was not as as advanced as the founders were. But I've been actually very pleasantly surprised by the quality. And the other thing to notice with Indian founders is, initially you will see people who were big cities, they went to top IITs, starting companies, right? Now the founder class has broadened considerably. You see people from smaller towns, from not as prestigious universities, actually starting great companies. And so that is also very positive for the country as a whole. Again, Munishi will tell me that the valuations don't reflect that, but it's still good to see, that's where we need. The key with startups and ecosystems is we just need, because there is so much random probability, the probabilities are low, that more people trying companies is better for an ecosystem. Somebody will find something that works. So it's good to have a lot of people trying things.
Hey, Venky, thanks for coming out here. I want to offer a comment first, maybe a counterpoint, and then have a question for you. You talked about B2B from India. I work for Zoho, and we are a B2B company from India. And we do not have the same share of the US market than comparable SaaS companies. Actually, it's a much smaller percentage. And so, in a sense, if I were to look back and say what makes something like this possible from India, is the notion of long-termism, which is abjectly missing in a lot of US companies, often backed by their investors. The other part of it is when you actually build something successful out of India, it becomes successful in geographies in ways that American companies are unable to do. So in a sense, I think there is a big future for India, but you've got to have that long-termism, and like somebody said earlier, you've got to, maybe it was yourself, you've got to have that confidence and not listen to what the world says. So thanks a lot. But I do have a question for you. So if you looked at the last 20 or 30 years, there's been this era of easy money, loose monetary policy, all of that ultimately flows down to institutional investors, and so VCs could manage to do what we did, So all that appears to change, even if you don't look at the ups and downs now. Long term, there is not a signal that that's going to happen in the foreseeable future. So how do you see that impacting your part of the business, and therefore what happens to startups and
You mean the change from a very easy money to much more?
Yeah.
So first, Vembu, so Zoho is the exception, like there is to every rule. Okay, so let's give Zoho a huge amount of credit. Vembu is also from Goda. He was 1 year my junior, so I used to know him at Goda pretty well. I've got huge kudos to what he's built and who he is at this point. No, absolutely. I think Zoho's an awesome company. I think it's both on the front end in terms of how you guys find customers as well as how you build your teams. It's an amazing company, right? So, in terms of the change in, like, this is the point I was making, which is Wall Street changes overnight, okay? And startups have to sort of deal with that. We're going through a very weird phase right now. So typically what happens, again, I'm not an economist, I just apply engineering principles like I mentioned. Typically what happens when you go from a very low interest rate environment to a very high interest rate environment is that in a low interest rate environment, the future is very valuable. Just the way the math works. In a very high interest rate environment, the future is not as valuable. It's all about the present, right? It's a good way to think about how valuable, in a low interest rate environment, the value shifts to the future. In a high interest rate environment, the value shifts to the present, right? It's not good for startups when the value shifts to the present, because startups are all about the future. And so this is, with the high interest rate regime, it is not great. We are lucky that Srinivas and OpenAI saved our money this time, okay? So there is a lot of things here. But I don't know how long this lasts, how long this is. Fundamentally, all forces of gravity are working against us at this point. So I would just say, be cautious. It's the sort of global backdrop looks pretty dire, but Silicon Valley sort of seems like it's found this pocket of exuberance that we can, and public markets as well have found this pocket of exuberance that we're all able to, have coattails too, right? So yeah, in a more normal, if you took the generative AI piece out of the picture, this would be a very bleak time. And it was a very bleak time, I would argue, until last October. And so did it come back? Did it not come back? Is not, I don't know. If you do this, you can make billions or trillions on Wall Street. But that's the big question. It's not a great time, let's be very clear. But it's, like I was mentioning to Shree, not great times are actually usually very good times to start companies and are very good times to make investments. So when we look at it as VCs, if you have a very difficult time, pretty much no one has momentum. Anybody who has momentum in this period of time, you should be investing in, okay? So the signal to noise is extremely good in tough times. Same thing with startups, if you can find something that works at this point, if things turn, it's actually going to work 10x better, right? So it's a great time to look for things that are working. So it's a great time to start, but you've got to realize capital is going to be really hard and manage a lot. And also, when you start a company in these times, you get all the right cultural pieces in. You're very capital efficient. You're, conscious of who you hire. Very, very careful, right? It's good. Gives you good discipline.
Thank you. That was very optimistic and
not optimistic. No, very pessimistic.
No, I thought that was great. So I think we are at time. But thank you so much for taking the time today for talking with us, and it was fun chatting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Venky, for being here and giving our keynote address for this Gajendra Circle conference.